Oftentimes your chess game will go deep into the endgame, where all that is left is 2 kings and 1 pawn each. Then the race begins to see which pawn will promote first to become a queen and win the game. Let's check out some examples of pawn races. In this position, notice that white's pawn is only 3 moves away from promoting. Also, black's pawn is only 3 moves away from promoting. In this position, it's white to move. Let's see who wins the pawn race. White is only 2 squares away from promoting. Notice black's pawn is still 3 squares away. Black tries to catch up with b3, and now white is ready to reach the finish line and promote on the very next move. Black's pawn races forward, only 1 square away from promoting, but as we'll see, it's 1 square too far away. White gets to promote first, and by turning it into a queen, notice white delivers checkmate. Let's take a look at that position again. We are in the exact same position, but this time it's black to move. Does one single move make a difference? Let's see. Black plays b3, h6, b2, h7. Both pawns are just 1 move away from promoting. In this case, black promotes first with check, and notice the queen also threatens to capture the h7 pawn. So after the king moves out of the way, queen takes h7. Notice the difference of 1 single move was enough to decide which side would win the pawn race and ultimately win the game itself. Let's look at another example. It's white to move in this position. Which side is going to promote first? Notice black's pawn is only 5 squares away from promoting, and white's pawn is 6 squares away. White can turn this race around by advancing 2 squares on the first move with h4. Now white is only 4 moves away from promoting, and black is still 5 moves away. Let's watch the pawn race. Both sides are just 1 move away from promoting, but white gets to promote first and delivers a checkmate. Let's take a look at one more example. In this position, it's black to move. So far we have learned that the pawn that can promote first not only wins the pawn race, but usually will win the game because gaining a queen advantage first is usually enough to win. There are some cases where promoting first does not help. Let's take a look at this position. Black plays a2, white plays h7. Both sides are ready to promote, and black wins the pawn race by promoting first. Notice the new queen is lined up with black's king on the a1 to h8 diagonal. This could create some problems for black because after white promotes, white's new queen joins the a1 h8 diagonal, checking black's king, and also is looking at the queen right behind black's king, like this. So notice, once the black king moves, the queens are revealed, and white wins the queen. Now white is ready to win the king and queen versus king ending. So in this case, just because you win the pawn race doesn't always mean you're going to win the game. Now that you've learned the ins and outs of pawn races, it's your turn to test your skill with pawn races. Castling early in the game is generally a good idea because you do 2 things at once. You get your rook into the game, and you move your king toward the corner where he will be out of the way of most of the action in the center. Normally you want to castle to a side that has pawns available to protect your king from attack, like this, and like this. Oftentimes, you'll have 3 pawns sitting directly in front of your king in a perfect row. This can provide a safe place for the king. However, these pawns also create a wall that the king cannot move through. And as you know, being able to move is one important way to avoid checkmate. In this position, you can see 3 pawns in front of black's king. Notice all of black's pieces have left the back rank, and the king is all alone. Remember, ranks are what we call rows in chess. What would happen if you were able to check the king on the back rank? Let's see. Rook to e8 delivers checkmate. Black's own pawns prevent the king from escaping the back rank. Let's look at this position again, but this time with a slight difference in the position. Do you notice the difference in this position? Black's pawn on h7 has moved to h6. This opens up a window for the black king in case white delivers a check on the back rank. Black escapes white's attack, and now it's white's turn to be cautious. If white tries to save a pawn with a4, a pawn may be saved, but the game will be lost. Notice white's back rank is completely unprotected. One of black's rooks can deliver a check. Let's say rook to d1, which forces rook e1. And now, after rook takes e1, it's checkmate. So how could white have avoided this back rank checkmate? Remember, the best way to avoid a back rank checkmate is to push a pawn in front of the king as a window for escape from the back rank. In this position, white could play h3, opening the h2 square for escape if black delivers a check on the back rank. Let's take a look at one more position. In this position, should white capture the pawn on b6? When you think about moving a piece, always ask, what is the space left behind? In this case, if the rook leaves b1, the back rank is left behind. This allows black to finish the game with a back rank checkmate. Obviously, white cannot allow this to happen, so let's see what white should do instead. White needs to open a window for the king's escape and move one of the pawns in front of the king. But which pawn should be moved? Let's try g3. This does open a window for white's king to escape the back rank, but it also weakens light squares right in front of white's king. This allows black to play bishop to h3, preventing the white king from escaping the back rank. So g3 actually makes white's king less safe. This leaves us with moving the h-pawn. After h3, white's king now has an escape square on h2, so back rank checkmate is no longer an issue. White can now capture the pawn on b6 with the rook on the next turn if black leaves it unprotected. Now that you've learned how to deliver and avoid back rank checkmate, it's your turn to practice back rank checkmates. The concept of counting attackers and defenders is important in every move in chess. You always want to make sure your pieces are well defended. Now keep in mind, because of the way the chessboard is set up from the start, there are 2 particularly weak squares, the f2 and f7 pawns. Take a moment to look at why that might be. If you notice that it's because the only defenders are the kings, you're right. A lone king is not a strong defender. So in many games of chess, a quick attack on the vulnerable f-pawns can sometimes be effective. Let's take a look at one of the most classic examples of a quick f7 attack. White plays e4, opening up the bishop and queen, as well as controlling the center. Black fights for control of the center with e5. White plays knight f3, attacking the e5 pawn, and black plays d6, protecting the pawn. Now white plays bishop to c4. What do you notice about the placement of white's light-squared bishop? It's pointing directly at the weak f7 pawn. Black needs to be careful, but in this case doesn't do so and plays a6, with the slow idea of playing b5 and attacking the light-squared bishop. But this idea is too slow. Notice black has only moved pawns, and white continues to gain a lead in development by bringing another piece into the game with knight to c3. Black realizes the a6 plan was too slow and decides to change plans by playing bishop to g4, pinning the white knight to the queen. Now, is this an absolute pin or a relative pin? It's a relative pin, so white plays the crazy-looking knight takes e5. Black cannot believe such great luck and immediately captures white's queen. But what would happen if black would have captured white's knight with d takes e5 instead? In this case, white would capture the bishop on g4 and gain an extra pawn from the captures. Let's go back to the position where black captures white's queen. What do you notice about white's pieces and how they relate to the f7 square? White has two attackers on f7, the knight and the bishop, and black's only defender is the lone king. So white plays bishop takes f7, check. Black's king cannot capture the bishop because it's protected by the knight. Also notice the powerful knight on e5 protects d7, so that means the king can only move to e7. After king e7, white has a forced checkmate. Can you find the winning move? It's knight d5, checkmate. All three of white's developed pieces work together to checkmate the black king. Now let's see if you can find the best attacking moves against the f2 and f7 squares. The entire game of chess is about checkmating the king. So while you might be winning in terms of having more pieces, or dominating the board, or having more time on your clock, if your opponent finds a way to checkmate you, it's game over. So above all else, you must protect your king. You've already learned that castling is one way to protect your king and get it out of the dangerous center. Even after you have castled, you need to keep your king safe. Let's take a look at some examples of king safety. In this position, black is in danger of being checkmated. Notice the weak dark squares around the king. White is ready to play queen g7 checkmate on the very next turn. How can black add a defender to the g7 square and avoid checkmate? Bishop f8. The dark squared bishop arrives just in time to prevent checkmate on g7 and attack the white queen. Let's take a look at another example. In this position, white decides to capture the knight on g6. Black does not want to allow white to win a piece for free, so black should recapture the bishop. Does it matter which way black recaptures the bishop? In this case, one capture loses the game instantly, and the other move keeps the game going. Let's take a look at h takes g6. This move looks okay, but notice it opens up the h-file, and black is in big trouble. There are two pieces of white's, the queen and the rook, lined up on the h-file, and now that the h-file is wide open, checkmate is delivered on the very next turn. Let's take a look at the other capture and see if that would have been better. Black could have played f takes g6. Notice this doesn't open up any lines of attack against the black king, and also black's knight is protecting the pawn on h7, so the queen should not capture that pawn. Let's take a look at one more example together. In this position, black is threatening checkmate on the very next move with queen takes h2. How can white prevent this checkmate? Well, white could capture the knight with the queen, but that would result in white losing a queen for a knight, not a good trade. In general, it is important to keep your pawns directly in front of the king, but sometimes you have to move a pawn forward in order to keep your king safe. In this case, the best move is to play h3. This blocks the queen and knight's attack on the h2 square, and it threatens to capture the knight. Now that you've learned the importance of king safety, it's your turn to practice keeping your king safe. Check because you should, check because you must, but never check because you can. It's tempting to deliver a check and attack your opponent's king, but you only want to do this when the check clearly makes your opponent's position worse or improves your own position. In this position, black's king is safely castled, and white is prepared to castle on the next turn. Does it make sense to check the white king? Absolutely. After rook e8 check, black's rook is now on an active, open file, attacking white's king. In order to not lose material, white's king must move. After king f1, white's king has lost the right to castle, so not only is the king poorly placed, notice that white's rook on h1 will have trouble getting into the game. In this case, the check improved black's position and made the opponent's position worse. Let's take a look at some examples when you shouldn't just check because you can. The opening phase of a chess game is all about controlling the center, developing your pieces quickly, and bringing your king to safety. With black to move, is it a good idea to check the white king with queen a5? Black should focus on continuing to develop pieces toward the center and preparing to castle the king. But after queen a5 check, black attacks white's king with the powerful queen, but now white can combine attack and defense with bishop d2. Black's check has only helped white continue to bring pieces into the game, and since black's queen is so valuable, black will be forced to waste time retreating the queen now that it is attacked by the bishop. In the last example, black's careless check lost time and allowed the opponent to gain a lead in development. Not a good thing, but also not the end of the world. In this position, a check will be disastrous. White has just played e5, attacking black's knight. Black should move the knight to safety, but when you are attacked, it is tempting to counterattack your opponent. Black can check white's king with bishop b4. Is this a good idea? After bishop b4 check, if white blocks the check with a piece, such as the knight or the bishop, black can trade the bishop for that piece and will be just fine. Can you find a stronger way to block the check for white? If you found c3, great job. White blocks the check and attacks the bishop with a pawn, so both black's knight and bishop are attacked by pawns, which means black is going to lose a piece. As we can see, playing a check without a clear plan can make a difficult situation much worse. Let's take a look at one more example together. In this position, white's bishop on d3 and queen on c2 are lined up and pointing at the h7 square. White can check black's king with bishop h7. Is this a good idea? Remember, only check your opponent if it makes their position worse or your position better. White should simply continue to develop with knight f3, bringing the knight closer to the center and opening up the diagonal for the bishop on c1. Instead, after bishop h7 check, black's king is forced to the corner with king h8. Although black's king was forced to move, how can white continue with the attack? White doesn't have any pieces to add pressure to black's king, and notice that the bishop that delivered the check is out of play and only has one escape route. If white isn't careful, this bishop might get trapped by a future g6 move, disconnecting the bishop from the queen. Now that you've learned the importance of only checking when you have a good reason, let's check your knowledge in the challenges. Sometimes in chess, you will get lucky and your opponent will give up an easy checkmate. But that's not always the case. It's usually harder than that, and you'll need to look deeper into the position in order to win. You might have checkmate, but it's in 2 moves instead of 1. This might be called mate in 2. Let's take a look at some examples where there is a forced checkmate in 2 moves. In any position, it's important to first look at all of the checks. With white to move, does white have any checks in this position? White only has 1, but it happens to be a good one. Knight to e7 check. This move forces the king to the open h-file, either h8 or h7. Let's say king h7. Notice that the white knight protects g8 and g6, meaning that the black king cannot escape the h-file. If white's queen can deliver a check on the h-file, it's checkmate. Can you find the move? Queen h5, checkmate. Since the queen and knight guard all of the escape squares for the black king, you just found a two-move checkmate. Great job. Let's look at another example. In this position, black is threatening checkmate on the very next move with queen takes g2, checkmate. Notice black has two attackers, the rook and queen, versus white's only defender, the lone king on h1. Now, before worrying about the checkmate, first look to see if white has any attacks to consider. Notice that the white queen and bishop line up on f7. There's only one defender, the king on g8. Which check would force the black king into the corner? Queen takes f7, delivers check, protected by the bishop, so the king cannot take the queen, and this forces the king into the corner with h8. Now white has three ways to deliver checkmate on the next move: queen e8, queen f8, or, working together with the light-squared bishop, queen to g8, checkmate. The king cannot capture the queen because the light-squared bishop protects the queen. Let's take a look at one more example together. In this position, white has two checks, queen f7 and queen h7. Notice queen f7 isn't a very good move. White has two attackers on f7, black has two defenders. Also, white would just lose the queen after bishop takes f7. So that move does not look very good. What about queen takes h7? White has two pieces attacking h7, and black has only one protector, the lone king. After queen h7 check, the king is going to be forced to f8. Do you see the two-move checkmate coming? After king f8, if you found queen h8, checkmate, great job. Now that you've seen some examples, it's your turn to practice delivering two-move checkmates.